Now we're going to move to the second part of today's live streaming, and we're going to speak about a little bit about Ukraine and what's happening in Europe as well. And for that, I'm joined by James Dellingpole. James, thank you very much for joining me today on Syriana Analysis. It's a really pleasure to have you. You're a journalist and columnist. You wrote for the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, the Times, the Daily Telegraph, and the Spectator. Have I missed something?
Back in the day. Back in the day. Yeah. I used to be a mainstream media journalist. I then went to kind of a Damascene conversion, and now those publications would not touch me with a barge pole, because I know their game, and their game is essentially, the mainstream media is a lie machine. It is pushing an agenda. It is not interested in the livelihoods or indeed the lives of its readership. It's not interested in informing them. It's interested in frightening them and brainwashing them. And what we're seeing now is the latest thing. They are trying to encourage us to get us in the mindset where we are itching for war with Russia, with Iran, with just they need a war, and that, I mean, that's how you need to understand everything that's going on. There's no point looking at the detail about how many American soldiers have been killed, or who really killed them, or who is responsible. It's, we need a war. We are going to do everything we can to engineer it. That's what's happening now.
Yeah. Exactly. Now we have this situation that is escalating in the region, in West Asia or in the Middle East. But in parallel, we have calls from the UK officials. They say that the people have to join the army. The UK Army chief warned citizens to prepare for massive war with Russia. He said, I was reading what he said in this regard. He said the head of the British Army has warned UK citizens to be prepared for a war on the scale of the great conflicts of the 20th century, and that they themselves may need to mobilize. Speaking at the International Armored Vehicles exhibition in London, General Sir Patrick Sanders said the Russian invasion of Ukraine is a sign of things to come, warning that the lessons of previous wars must be remembered before it is too late. Quote, our predecessors failed to perceive the implications of the so-called July crisis in 1914 and stumbled into the most ghastly of wars, he said. We cannot afford to make the same mistake today. Ukraine really matters. I mean, when I read such statements, I'm truly interested and genuinely want to know, in your country, like, is there a general feeling that there is an imminent threat by Russia against your country and against Europe? Because Boris Johnson also posted a video asking the people to join the army.
Well, yeah, there's lots of things to unpack. I hate to use that word, but to unpack here. First of all, you need to understand that people in Britain, like people in Australia, like people in the West generally, have been subjected for the last 2 or 3 years to this massive psyop over Ukraine. It's hard to drive through an English village without seeing at least one old house with a blue and yellow flag stuck to its side, or flying a blue and yellow flag from its flag.
In Berlin, the same thing.
And it's bizarre. So I live in rural Northamptonshire, in the middle of the country, and I go riding a couple of times every week. And whenever I go around the jumping field, there opposite me, fluttering in the breeze, is this blue and yellow flag. I doubt the person who owns that flag on his property could place Ukraine on a map. I don't think he's familiar with the politics of the country, or its history, or its relationship with Russia. He's just been told, like the NPC that he is, that Ukraine is the next big thing, and he must be interested in it. And the plucky freedom fighters of honest, innocent Ukraine are being oppressed by this man, this evil man called Putin, who is at least as bad as Hitler, if not worse. And unless we draw a line in the sand now, then this man, Putler, is going to roll over the whole of Europe, a bit like Hitler did with his tanks in 1939, and it's going to be awful. and we've got to resist now, and the lessons of history, and it could be like World War One as well. So you get all this stuff, and people who imbibe the message of the mainstream media are very susceptible to this narrative because
Yes.
they trust the newspapers. They think, and it's I used to write for the Telegraph mainly, which is a sort of conservative broadsheet newspaper. And my wife still gets it. I don't read it, but I glance contemptuously at it occasionally. And I'm astonished by how many pieces appear every week in
Hmm.
its op-ed pages, written by either retired battalion commanders who supposedly distinguished themselves in Iraq,
Hmm.
or defense correspondents hot for war with Russia, saying, one more push and we'll beat beat Putin, or it looks like the situation is slightly worse than we told you, therefore we need more materiel, or we
Yes.
need to spend more money, or it's relentless. And if you read your newspapers uncritically and you believe what you said, what the newspapers told you, you would think that the biggest threat in the world right now was Putin. Having said that, I then noticed the response on Twitter. Twitter's not very representative, but I
Yes.
asked a question the other day, like, does any real person feel threatened by Russia,
Yeah.
let alone feel that we need to go to war
Yes.
with them? And the response, apart from a few very obvious 77th Brigade, intelligence bots, which are very easy to spot because they've got a very small number of followers. They were created quite recently, and you look at the followers, and they all tend to be kind of
Yes.
prostitutes or
Yes.
whatever, or military personnel. The response was unanimous. I mean, it wasn't even sort of 90-10. It was like pretty much 99 to 1, or 100 to 100%
Yes.
of favorable to my cause, which is essentially, we don't need this war. We're not interested. Shove it up your ass, Boris Johnson. So I don't. I would say you remember 1914. Obviously, you don't remember 1914. But if you look at your history of the build-up to both the First and the Second World Wars, what you will see is a slow to anger populace
Hmm.
with a don't forget, natural sort of kinship with Germany.
Yes.
The Germans were our natural allies, not the French. The
Hmm.
Germans, I mean, our royal families were related, and
Yeah.
we're Anglo-Saxons after all. We share many characteristics. The British people were being whipped up into an anti-German frenzy by
Hmm.
relentless propaganda. So that by the time war broke out, young men were thinking, yes, we must go and defeat this evil menace. And
Yes.
it reached the point in the First World War. The public was so brainwashed that they were starting to kill Dachshunds. The Dachshunds were being killed because they were German dogs, and Bechstein and Steinway pianos were being ritually smashed up as a sort of symbol of the hatred of all things German. In fact, there was something similar in the early days of the anti-Putin psyop, where suddenly operas stopped staging Eugene Onegin or performing.
Yes.
Literary book clubs would no longer read Dostoevsky or Tolstoy because they represented
Yeah.
the new enemy. And
Next
this is
step,
how it
burn
works.
them. Next step, burn these books.
So I don't sense any antipathy towards the Russian
Yeah.
people. I think there's lots of people in this country who kind of wish that Putin was their prime minister and not Rishi Sunak. Um, I'm kind of a plague in all their houses. I'm suspicious of. I think Putin says a lot of tasty things,
Yeah.
about our culture and our heritage and about Christianity and so on, and about woke. But then so does Elon Musk. I don't trust him either. I think it's a mistake to put your faith in any world leader. I think they're all part of the game. But that said, no, I don't think that anyone in the UK who is informed or intelligent and not brainwashed is hot for war with Russia. No.
Yeah. Taking from what you said, because you also mentioned the cultural aspect, the ideologies, nowadays we can see that many of the Western governments are pushing their ideological perspective even on children in the kindergartens. And you can see there is an attempt to indoctrinate children as well in schools, wokeism, trying to inject LGBTQ everywhere. You can see the flags like Ukraine, LGBTQ, and not even German flags nowadays here in Germany. You don't see that. However, Putin or Russia represents, for the Europeans who are not afraid of Russia, it also represents an ideological counter to what's happening in the Western societies. Therefore, the elites in this country see Putin as a threat to the West in general, because he threatens the so-called rules-based order, but also the ideological aspect that they're trying to psyop their people, right? So Putin, in one way or another, he represents a threat to the ruling establishment, let's say, in the West, but not in a way that he's coming to conquer the European continent by true military force. Because the proof of that is, if Putin represented this big threat to Europe, why all the European countries didn't prepare for war in the past decades? I mean, the number of the soldiers are pathetic when you see the numbers compared to Russia, right?
They are. They are. Absolutely. Yeah. Putin is very good at trolling the West and appealing to that conservative element, which is appalled by the cult of
Yeah.
woke and stuff. I whether that's reason enough for all right-thinking conservatives to go and up sticks and move to Russia, I'm not sure that they'd necessarily be that happy there. But you're right. You mentioned the rules-based order, which is one of the cliches that we get served up by the sort of the Western elites, the governments, and we're told that we live in this wonderful thing called liberal democracy, and we've been brainwashed into thinking that liberal democracy is the political desideratum. And actually, as you've hinted, what liberal democracy really is whoever you vote for, you get the same squishy liberal sellout, high tax, high regulation regime with added rainbow flags. I mean, that's what liberal democracy. It's not a desirable thing at all. So yeah, but again, I'm not sure that what Putin is offering is necessarily that much more enticing.
Yeah, I will ask a question here, and this is completely conspiracy theory, right? Because I was trying to think about it, and I learned that the Russians are preparing for what is called the spring offensive in Ukraine. And they're sending 1,500 reinforcement every week to the front lines. And if you see the age rate in the Ukrainian army, it's around 40 years old. Lots of men, younger men, either died or they left the country. So they're suffering from manpower. And the Russians are sending more reinforcement to the front line. And they will try to break through some of the defense lines of the Ukrainians in the Donbas region, and probably try to also in the south to Odessa. And this is called may happen in the next 2 years, right? Like in this discourse, that the Brits can see that the Russians will occupy major parts of Ukraine and push Ukraine into a landlocked country. Therefore, they need troops in Western Ukraine to protect what is left in Western Ukraine, or probably try to incorporate it to Hungary, to Romania, that it was the case previously. Do you think that they are asking people to join the army now, to send them to Western Ukraine to try to keep what is left from Ukraine?
I think it's very hard to know exactly what is being planned, and I think that how the rulers of the darkness of this world, the people responsible for the First World War, the central bankers, I suppose you'd call them, among other things. The central bankers created the First World War. They created the Second World War. We've already been, the Third World War started years ago, but we're talking about the hot stage of this war that they want. So what they do, I think, is they float various possibilities. They set up various things. So It could be against Iran. It could be against Russia. And they so arrange things that they keep their options open. So if they think there's a chance but going back to that thing that General Sanders said, is he Chief of General Staff? I think he's either head of the British Army or the head of the
army.
Yeah, head of the army. So you think about where he said it. He said it at an international armored, an event I've never heard of before.
Yeah.
It's not like all the journalists going, oh, it's the International Armored Car event, whatever it is. We must cover that because something interesting is always said. This was clearly staged. By whom, we don't know, but it was clearly decided by whoever controls the media agenda that this was going to be the hot ticket item.
Yeah.
And our papers have been absolutely full of it ever since. And it's interesting to see. I'm interested to see how the psychological operation works. So you get the initial story, the initial news story. It's not news. It's just this guy said something at a conference, and they decided to make it news by putting it on the front page. You then the next day get Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, saying, "Well, of course, conscription is never part of our plan." So the story continues on the news agenda. This time in the form of Prime Minister denies that Britain is having conscription. You then get, for example, in the Telegraph, you got in the features pages, we ask 6 of our writers whether or not they'd want to go to war with Russia, like this. And then in the Mail on Sunday, you get Peter Hitchens going, "Oh, I don't think there should be, this idea is ridiculous. There shouldn't be war. It's absolutely not on." And at every stage, you are being the audience of these newspapers is imagining that they are being told news. They're not being told news. They are being sold a story from different angles. So that you've got the principled resistor actor in Peter Hitchens. You've got the slightly wacky columnists respond to this idea. You've got you then had a double page spread from Daniel Johnson, sort of talking about the history of Britain's role in war and how it's so important not to be prepared after the mistakes in the past and so on. So every angle they've got covered. So suddenly everyone in the country who reads newspapers is now going, well, it seems like this war is maybe inevitable. We ought to start thinking about this. The one thing no newspaper is asking, because that would give the game away, is where did the idea of this story come from? Who decided to prioritize a speech by this guy Sanders, who most people have never heard of before, and anyway has a vested interest in increasing the size of the military because he's in charge of the army. So of course he wants more men and material to play with because he wants his train set. He wants a bigger train set. No one at any stage is asking that, even the supposedly anti-war people. And that's how you are being played. Sorry, that didn't really answer your question, but I think it's worth it.
No, you did. You did. We turned around the topic and then we touched it perfectly. And because you mentioned Peter Hitchens, by the way, I was reading his article today I think this is in the Daily Mail, right? He was saying many people to this day still think the damaging and morally dubious Western attacks on Serbia and Libya were justified. Many still think the gory attempt to destroy Syria was a good thing. It took ages for opinion to swing on the Vietnam War back in the 1960s. And as one who opposed the Iraq War, I remember only too well just how many who now think they were against it all the time were fooled into backing Sir Anthony Blair and George W. Bush. The issue is more pressing as generals and admirals warn we must live in a militarized society and prepare for what they think is an inevitable war against Russia. They could get their way. If you go on backing this policy, you could be condemning yourself, your children or grandchildren to a world of war, privation, and perhaps conscription into some sort of military service. And he was asking this question here in blue: what if the Ukraine war is just as stupid and wrong as the Iraq war, but the state propaganda has been more successful and hardly anybody has realized yet?
Yeah. It's interesting the role that Hitchens plays in the narrative. I think he is probably a change agent. I think both he and his brothers were change agents, and Peter Hitchens is a kind of safety valve. I think part of the illusion of the media is to give people the notion that the false notion, I believe, that their viewpoints are being represented, that they do live in a world where this stuff hasn't already been decided for them. That if only enough people sort of think hard enough about this issue, the political machinery will grind to a halt and sense will prevail. It offers a false hope, but it's not. But it is again part of the illusion. So yeah, he floats the idea that so many of these wars, Syria, going back to Vietnam, we were manipulated into wanting them to happen. But I think he would never go so far as to make the truer point, which is that all wars since, let's say, the French Revolution, if you can call that a war, have been funded and promoted by the same people, by the rulers of the darkness of this world, the cabal, the predator class, whatever you want to call them. Part of their business model is perpetual war or near perpetual war, because they can destroy countries. They can then profit from the rebuilding of those countries. They can control those countries and make sure that they're under their thumb, and on it goes.
Actually, now in Syria, since they destroyed, which is my country, they destroyed half the country. If Assad, who is called dictator by the same people, if he accepts today that he would allow these bankers and corporations to reconstruct the country, they would carry him on their shoulders, and they would polish his name again, and they would call him a reformer again and a Democrat again and everything, just because he said no. I'm not going to allow for the World Bank. I'm not going to take loans. I'm not going to allow the American bankers and these construction companies to come to Syria. I'm going to give it to my partners, to my allies. And they choke the country. They surround the entire country. They don't allow Syria to do business. They don't even allow one transaction to fly from Syria to the outside world. And it's just a complete blackout on the country. And now we have seen these attacks on the American forces. Americans say it happened in Jordan. Jordan says, no, it's not happened in Jordan. It happened on the Syrian side of the border. And the Americans have to answer this question to the people. What are we doing in Syria? Why are we on the border crossing, the main border crossing that connects Syria's trade routes with Jordan and with Iraq? And there are no ISIS attacks against the American forces there, right? And it's really hilarious what's happening in that part. So I would like to ask you this, like, because you mentioned the cabal, and I truly believe that there are people behind the powerful. We think they are powerful people, but there are powerful people behind the powerful people, as I try to research. And are they really trying to trigger war with Iran in the region? Is this the end goal?
Yeah,
a war with Iran.
yeah.
Yes, right.
I think I think that, let's not forget that these people are very heavily into symbolism. They are very heavily into the occult. I think it was Albert Pike, although there are disputes about whether this is genuine or not, but there are suggestions that Albert Pike, who was a very high-level Freemason, predicted the First and the Second World Wars and described their purpose. He also predicted the Third World War and its purpose. I think that a lot of these people are ultimately preoccupied with Revelation, with Armageddon. I think that they consider themselves to be fulfilling their part of their Luciferian stroke satanic plan.
Wow.
And they're putting all the pieces in place to make this happen. It's not going to be pretty if you believe the Bible, which I do. I think that we are probably going to get a war, because apart from anything else, I mean, okay, even if you look at it not in terms of the supernatural war, which I believe is taking place between good and evil, look at it in terms of the economy. The dollar is on the very last stages of its existence. You know, it's been depreciating since 1913 when the Federal Reserve designed it to fail. Um, the, the global debt now runs into the trillions. There's no way that people are ever going to be repaid. So how do they cover up this stuff? They do what they always do, which is engineer another war. Which is why I think we should all be very skeptical about being drawn into these things. I mean, I don't read reports about what the Houthis are up to, because I know that we're just being played. It's the same with these. Okay, some American servicemen have been shot or killed. That this is these are kind of blood sacrifices, which I'm sure that the American deep state was happy to collaborate in order to. It could be a false flag. You just don't know. But all you need to know is the bad guys in charge want a world war, and they are doing everything in their power to engineer it right now. And our job is to just say no. We're not having it. We're not going to fight for your stupid bankers' wars.
I agree with you, and I think that bad days are expected here. Dark days are expected in Europe, and many people are. I mean, they're predicting big turmoil in Europe, and I don't know what to do. You know, like I came from Syria to Europe from one war zone. It's like I don't want to live another war. I've had enough in my 35 years seeing so many wars already in the Middle East. I would like to live in peace, and this is one of the reasons why I do this podcast, to encourage people to say no, because people sometimes need a little bit of encouragement. You know, like people are mostly busy with their lives and they don't have so much time to do the research. So I really appreciate that hundreds of people watch this podcast and listen to you guys. His Twitter account is in the description below. Hit him a follow. And also, one of the commentators said that if you can, please donate to UNRWA, the UN refugee agency for the Palestinian refugees. I also put the link in the description below. I'm not going to ask you to support my independent work. If you have $2, go and donate to the UNRWA. I think that's also important. And it's very important for you guys to, as James said, to say no. Don't be passive, be active, resist these narratives that there is an imminent war. No, we can reverse that. I'm living as a Syrian of Armenian background, living in Germany. I do not want war with Russia, and I do not want war with any other power, whether it's in Europe or elsewhere. That's why it's very important to have an open discussion about these cases and warn the people, because at any moment the elites can flip the switch, and they could send us all into a war mode. And just like they did during the Corona times, they were, in one day and another, they chose the fate of millions of people, tens of millions of people. They decided that they have to stay home in whatever injection they have to take. We may agree or disagree on that, but it's just the forcing people to do something that the governments proved that they're capable of doing it. So that's why I wanted to say, like, we should really be active in this regard.
You think about how the world would be if it weren't for these scumbags who've ruled the world since time immemorial. I mean, I would love to be going to Syria. I would love to be going. I'd love to see Crac de Chevalier and Damascus and Aleppo. I mean, there are so many. I understand it's a beautiful, beautiful country.
Very beautiful.
And I find it appalling that because of the evil, frankly, of a few shadowy people who operate behind the scenes and pull the strings of governments, that Syria has been destroyed. To what purpose? I mean, do Syrians deserve this? Does anyone deserve this? No, they don't. We need to say no. We need to say no.
Yeah.
Stop these bastards getting away with it.
Yeah, actually, I saw evil with my own eyes in Syria. And when I came to Germany, people asked me, "Oh, you came to Germany, it's a peaceful place. Why don't you just live your life?" You know, I said, I cannot do that. I saw evil with my eyes, and I want to tell the people about it. I want to enlighten the people that what they did to Syria, it's not only wrong, it was evil. People's heads were put on sticks in the streets. and these people were called freedom fighters, democratic rebels, etc., etc. We've seen these people with our own eyes. It's terrifying what they did to the country, and the Syrians do not deserve that. We were living a peaceful life in Syria. We didn't harm anyone. We didn't invade any other country, and just they decided that they have to change a regime there. So in the discourse of that, they have to destroy the country, and the people who they supported in Syria, I mean, you can't even call them scumbags. It's an understatement when you call them scumbags, you know?
Yeah, sure. I know. And there's doubts about all sorts. The white helmets were not as sold, were they? A lot of these supposedly freedom fighting organizations were funded by the CIA and organizations like that in order to commit atrocities to try and escalate the war.
Yeah, exactly. James, I'm very happy to speak with you, and also grateful that you dedicated your time to me and to hear your perspective in this case. I'm very happy to have you, and I would like to have you again in the near future to continue on this case, because I'm sure that they will push more into this narrative, like the evil Putin is going to invade us very soon. So we have to discuss more in this regard. Thank you so much. And guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's live streaming. I appreciate you all. Before leaving this live streaming, please just hit the like button. It's free. It helps me with the algorithm of YouTube. And also hit a follow to James on Twitter or X in the description below. And as I mentioned, the honorable donation link is also in the description below. And I will see you tomorrow at 5 p.m. Central European Time. Salam.